division, whether it's within the continent of Europe, or indeed within NATO, absolutely emboldens our adversaries. And if they read this, both the briefings by officials in the White House and indeed the strategy, as America is no longer interested in supporting its allies against us, Russia, for example, and its behavior, then it will carry on. And President Putin shows that whereas there is weakness in his view, he will exploit it.
Now, the Trump administration appears to be radically resetting its relationship with NATO and its European allies. It's being reported that the US wants Europe to take over the majority of NATO's conventional defence capabilities, from intelligence to missiles, by 2027. It's a really tight deadline. Well, the new US security strategy also raises questions about the future of the US role in NATO, with a former NATO official telling Times Radio that it would be music to the ears of those in the Kremlin. Well, let's get the thoughts now of Sir Ben Wallace, the former Conservative Defence Secretary. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
What do you make of these latest comments coming out of the White House?
Well, I think these comments are part of the briefing behind the national security strategy that Donald Trump's White House published yesterday, which sets out really the White House's view of the world and America's role in it. And I think it is clear in there that America is becoming more focused on what it calls the Western Hemisphere, and that's North America, Central, South America, and the Caribbean. It talks at length about that is its main focus, and it also talks about America first throughout, and that everything it will do will be in the interests of the United States, not particularly unreasonable. And it sets out some principles. But then within those principles, it also contradicts itself quite considerably. And I don't think it's really been written by experts or professionals in the foreign policy field. It's very much a MAGA national security strategy.
So when you're talking about America first, and we hear that so much from Donald Trump and his administration, is it purely American first, or do you think it goes as far as being almost anti-European in sentiment?
Well, it definitely contradicts itself. I wouldn't say anti-European. What it says is, first of all, that, we are no longer going to effectively be the world's policeman. And America has either enjoyed that role or certainly delivered that role since the Second World War. It's not going to, it says, interfere in other nations, except bracket on further into the document on certain European issues where it decides it wants to. And it is reaffirming that everything it does is about American trade, American greatness, etc. So some of it isn't a surprise. I think what's more interesting is really how it lacks a depth that should make us slightly worry. It clearly looks like when it comes to Europe that the authors believe everything they've read on social media and X, etc. I mean, there are lines in there saying that some European countries will be non-European in population in the near future. It talks about Europe dragging America into conflicts in the past. In our living memory, you could argue that it was America the other way around. It was America in Iraq War. It was after 9/11. It was the only time Article 5 of NATO was triggered was when the NATO allies came to the support of the United States. It wasn't the other way around. So I'm not entirely sure the author of this has travelled very far, to be honest. Maybe Mar-a-Lago.
There's also reports this morning that conversations between Pentagon officials and European diplomats saying that the US wants Europe to essentially take over the majority of NATO's defence capabilities by 2027. Clearly, that's just over a year away. That would be expensive. Is it achievable?
Well, it's certainly achievable, maybe not in that timeline, but by 2030, if Europe and the United Kingdom actually want to step up to the plate. And to be fair to Donald Trump, this part is him really, I think, just losing his patience. The United States asked nicely in 2014, when President Obama was the president, that Europe, including Britain, must carry a greater burden of its defence. And everyone sort of played games with that. They went to 2%. Britain talked about 2% commitment to GDP, which was the American set target, and promptly piled in a whole load of artificial figures like VAT receipts. The United States went to The Hague and got a 5% commitment for security and defence, 3.5% for defence alone. And Britain promptly folded in intelligence services budgets, pushed timelines way out to the mid 2030s, and went back to spinning press releases. And, I think America has been warning for well over a decade that we've got to carry the burden. At the moment, the only real countries stepping up are Germany, Poland, the Nordic countries. Britain isn't. Britain's back to press releases and posturing around the world at the moment and spin from the Ministry of Defence. It isn't actually stepping up. It is possible if we want to do it. We have the capabilities, we have the skills, we have the pan-European industrial base that could deliver. But I don't think Britain and anybody else shows that they're prepared to listen, that we need to rearm to deter. Rachel Reeves didn't even mention defence in her budget speech this year, didn't mention it. And there is a war on the European continent right now.
You talk about these warnings coming from the US since 2014. Obviously, the Conservatives were in power back then. And obviously, even when you were Defence Secretary in the last government, was there an appetite then to step up?
Well, there wasn't an appetite in large parts of the last Labour and Conservative government for the last 30 years. And I was on the record and still am, as publicly saying that both Labour and Conservative governments hollowed out defence for 30 years. Now, I give you an example of the attitude of the current government. They very conveniently nitpick that statement I've made for years by saying, yes, Ben Wallace said the Conservatives hollowed out defence. We're going to be credible in this. Both governments, both political parties cut defence consistently beyond what was required and beyond what the threat was. When I got in 2019 as Defence Secretary, I actually got £24 billion of real money growth, the first real growth, and turning around off that decline. When I left, we were growing in our defence budget, and obviously now with the new government, we've actually sort of seen a flat line or indeed pushing to the right. So the reality is, yes, many people get it in both sides of the political spectrum, in the Labour Party as well. Chancellors don't seem to get it, and nor do prime ministers.
Obviously, Labour have said they're going to commit to greater defence spending, but you're absolutely right, there wasn't a mention of it in the budget. Russia, watching all these conversations between the US, what Trump is saying, potential pressures, tensions within the NATO alliance, does that just embolden Russia and President Putin?
That does. I mean, division, whether it's within the continent of Europe, or indeed within NATO, absolutely emboldens our adversaries. And if they read this, both the briefings by officials in the White House and indeed the strategy, as America is no longer interested in supporting its allies against us, Russia, for example, and its behavior, then it will carry on. And President Putin shows that whereas there is weakness in his view, he will exploit it. And that's what he's doing right now. I mean, there's a bit of hope in the document. It does call it Russia's war in Ukraine. It doesn't call it Ukraine's war or anything else. It does recognize that Russia were involved, started the war in Ukraine. But yes, look, when America isolates, we all suffer. It has never been when America is greatest. It does this every 100 years or 70 years. Donald Trump is just another president who's done that before. America First as a movement appeared in 1938, 1939 in Congress, actually. It wasn't in Mar-a-Lago or anywhere else. It was an old, and it's a political movement in America. It's perfectly logical for some of them. But I think we have to recognize that if people no longer can we take the Americans for granted, and I once wrote an article saying that, and I don't disagree with that feeling by Americans that we need to step up. We're some of the richest countries on earth, yet we've been asking the Americans to pay for it. So in that part, I agree. The vision of the world, I don't agree.
You said there's a little bit of hope in the document. How hopeful are you feeling generally about the direction of travel?
Well, I think the document is just clear that, look, if you're the United States and actually basically all of the world, you have to recognize that China is a growing superpower and potentially could dominate not only our economies, but also our freedoms and our rule of law. And actually, that's why it is actually even more important to believe in international rules-based system, the very system that's made America so wealthy and successful since the Second World War. And actually, it's why alliances matter. And I said at the beginning of this, one of the contradictions of this document is it talks about America first, but then a large part of the document talks about a desperate need for allies to support America in tackling those global challenges. And, when you're at Sandhurst, you're a young officer as I was, the motto of Sandhurst is serve to lead. To be a leader, you have to give up a bit. You have to be generous in leadership. And that's the contradiction between American first and wanting to bring along an alliance that stands for all the freedoms that allow America to trade.
Sir Ben Wallace, thank you for coming on this morning. Grateful to you for your time.
Thank you.
Sir Ben Wallace there, the former Conservative Defence Secretary. Really interesting his assessment of that US security strategy, saying that it lacks a depth that should make us worried, and also saying he feels that it had been written by somebody who hadn't travelled very far, maybe only to Mar-a-Lago.
Yes. I think one of the parts of it is a feeling that it might be somewhat incoherent, believe it or not, from the Trump administration when it comes to their security strategy.
Difficult to respond to that if it's incoherent,
exactly,
isn't it?
Because this idea of America first has a whole range of different priorities from around the world. So it seems to focus on some allies, particularly in Asia, but actually generally everywhere else, the expectation, the language used is about submission, that other countries need to just go along with what America wants, both economically and militarily. On Europe, I noted this as well from it. Our goal should be to help Europe correct its current trajectory. So it's these concerns that you often hear expressed from the likes of Vice President Vance about, woke issues and migration and the kind of dominance of liberal values, that actually America sees its role as trying to correct that from a European viewpoint.
Well, also, can you imagine what the response would be from the Trump administration if European leaders started to tell America about its direction of travel, but apparently it's okay for the US administration to tell Europe how they should run their societies.
And make it a core part of a national security strategy is the other part of that. It is utterly astonishing.